Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum, Transformational Technology 2024. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we will turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors, Adobe, Freshworks, and UiPath. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we have received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce John Arsneault, Chief Information Officer and Chief Data Officer, Goulston Storrs. We're super excited to have John for his opening keynote presentation titled Infrastructure Evolution, Modernizing EA to Drive Business Modernizations. Welcome, John. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks everybody for joining us today. This is a topic that's near and dear to me. Today, as Nick mentioned, I'm a CIO of a law firm. But my background goes back to the early internet days and building infrastructures to support products and services around infrastructure dispersed throughout the globe. And so I learned early on the importance of architecture and the impact that it has not only on making IT's life easier, but in being able to serve up applications and services to end users. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of enterprise architecture, and I'll talk for a couple of slides about some sort of basic tenets around this, including the opportunities that exist today to really simplify and solidify architecture. And then I'll use a use case of my current firm and what we've done there to support the things that I talk about. So, my first note is that architectures are the foundations of success or difficulty. And I found this to be increasingly true over the years. We've all, any IT leader has been through building out infrastructures that have been piecemealed over time to support individual initiatives. We've seen this at a network, server, SAN layer. We've also seen this at the application layer with integrations. And we see this today at the data layer. And lots of people talk about, technical debt or data debt. It's mostly due to the desire to support an initiative or an organization's vision of implementing technologies to help the business. But over time, those initiatives sort of pile up, and there's never really been an overarching architecture strategy to build out an ecosystem of the technology components that make up an organization's IT stack. The technical debt leads to escalating maintenance costs and, quite frankly, barriers to adopt new solutions. Any IT leader has been through a process where they've looked at wanting to either bring in a new application or a new service, or even upgrading existing ones, only to find barriers to do so because of all of the sort of spiderweb connections to various integrations, aged physical hardware, aged age design around bringing solutions into the organization. And this is something that IT wrestles with quite a bit. So I've personally seen core applications age out even up to a decade or more because of a reluctance to tackle these problems. Nowhere is this more obvious these days than in data architectures, as the world turns its attention to all the opportunities around AI. Having your data in a place where you can actually make use of it is business vital, and the lack of a button-up data architecture is a major barrier to AI adoption. All the innovation that's occurring today around AI, one of the things that's not talked about a lot is the barrier to being able to actually utilize those tools if you don't have your data in a place where it can be utilized. Next slide, Nick. So the good news is there's a tremendous opportunity available to IT leaders today that really wasn't available for a long time, and that centers around SaaS. And people have been talking about the cloud now for a decade, and I think there's been a splintering effect of adoption. You have organizations that took everything that they had and put it into the cloud in the form of infrastructure services like AWS or Azure. You had organizations that did hybrid models. And then every now and then you run into an organization that went completely SaaS. SaaS is an opportunity that dramatically simplifies infrastructure, as well as applications and data capabilities. It also allows for strengthened security through simplification. Simplification is one of the things that I use as a tenet to design systems and to design the ecosystem of the firm that I work for. I think it goes against the grain of what most IT operations are these days, which tend to be incredibly complex. SaaS is, to me, the thing that opened the door to being able to do this at scale. I've adopted the tenet that complexity is IT's enemy all around. I think you see that not only in infrastructure, but in the application space and then in the user experience. Moving poorly designed architectures to the cloud, however, just taking things that today live in your data center and moving them to AWS or Azure will not improve things. And in fact, it will probably make them more complex and more expensive. A lot of organizations have found that moving into just plain vanilla cloud architecture will drive the cost of services up and drives complexity up, changes the landscape of the type of talent that you need. But if you're just taking the existing and moving it to the cloud to get out of the data center business, I think you're going to find that over time that's going to be a regrettable move. I think what you want to try to do is designate applications that are developed in-house. If you have that and you have a lot of different applications that are developed and maintained by internal staff, you want a strategy around scalability and automation within an AWS or Azure type environment. But anything that is derived from a third-party vendor, a third-party application provider, you should pursue SaaS versus traditional cloud. The difference between SaaS and cloud is day and night in regards to management. And the biggest benefit to SaaS is realignment of IT resources. You can literally move resources that are spending their time on the care and feeding of technical stacks to keep things running, to get closer to the business, which is a win for everybody. Next slide, please, Nick. So when we look at sort of enterprise architecture as a facilitator of digital transformation, I thought it would be helpful to just sort of talk through the use case that my team has experienced over the last 10 years. We are a 450 person law firm headquartered in Boston with an office in New York and DC. And when I arrived in 2014, we had all the traditional sort of technology tools in place. We had our own hardware, we had our own SANs, we had complex networks, complex remote access protocols, etc. And we began the journey to what we call cloud in 2014. We completed that journey in 2019. So we've been 100% in the cloud now for about 5 years. We're 95% SaaS, and that was a strategic decision right out of the gate. We do have to maintain a handful of non-SaaS services in Microsoft Azure because of vendors just not having certain applications that are vital to our business ready to be SaaS enabled yet. When we started this, we found that a large percentage of the software providers in the legal services space did not have SaaS availability. They didn't have a SaaS strategy, but over time that has certainly changed. We actually had to order our approach of which applications do we pursue SaaS with based on the availability versus just a strategic list that was more geared towards the firm at the time. But I think if folks are doing this today, you'll find that most vendors in most industries have SaaS enabled services. The other thing that we found early on was that SaaS versions didn't always mimic feature sets of on-premise. I think that's actually resolved itself as well these days. So our network itself is infrastructure as a service. We've really simplified the network. We had a traditional Cisco network with a variety of different vendors for security appliances, etc. We've moved that to essentially a Wi-Fi only network in our 3 offices. It's all Meraki, so it's all managed by the vendor itself. We don't have Ethernet connections in our office. We have, as you go to SaaS, as most people would understand, you have zero physical maintenance or life cycle work. So if you think about that in relation to your own organization and how much time, resource, and money is spent on the upgrade path of whether it's network gear, server gear, all the application patching and security, 0-day and routine sort of upgrades that you do, we've eliminated 95% of that work from IT and have been devoid of that work now for about 5 years. We've also really simplified the user experience, especially in relation to what people refer to as remote access. We actually don't even use that term anymore. It doesn't matter where you are. We don't have things like Citrix or VPNs. User experience is basically the same regardless of whether you're in the office or somewhere else. I mentioned we only have Wi-Fi. We recently relocated our office space in New York and our headquarters in Boston, and it allowed us this approach to avoid having to pay for cabling those buildings, and it was a 7-figure savings. One of the side benefits of no longer having physical Ethernet as well is your Windows devices don't have to toggle between wired and wireless, which Windows is sort of notoriously bad at handling device driver toggling. We don't have physical phones. We got rid of those probably about 4 years ago. We set out to build all of our applications behind single sign-on. We chose Okta as our vendor to handle that. So we provide an Okta landing page for all the users, and then at least from an access standpoint, all the applications are available to users based on whatever apps they need. We also have them working in a way where their devices are trusted devices, and that makes the user experience the same for pretty much everything that people need access to at the firm. Once you're in an application, of course, the UI or UX can be a little bit different, but at least getting to that place is consistent across everything that you do. We also standardized on application selection, and this is, I can't really overemphasize this enough, because this to me is one of the most important components of building an architecture strategy, but it's also one of the most difficult. So we standardized on applications that were obviously SaaS. They had to have modern APIs. They had to support Okta because that's the SSO that we chose. And we also moved away from what were called Microsoft Office sort of COM plugins, which in the legal industry were extremely common. They may or may not be common in your organization. But from just an architecture standpoint, in order to simplify the environment and to build this ecosystem that we thought would be exceptionally better in function, we had to announce that these were our standards. And anytime somebody proposed wanting a solution in the industry, if the solution didn't meet these standards, that application and that vendor were eliminated from consideration. Today, these standards are relatively easy to find in most modern tools, but when we started, that wasn't always the case. And even today, we will find vendors that don't meet these standards. If you make exceptions to this stuff, your ecosystem will not end up with at the vision point that you started with. And so I think success is inherently tied to being able to not only talk about these things with the business leaders in your organization, but to be able to defend them, because there will be people that will see things that look great for their particular operation, and the software, if it doesn't meet these standards, they'll argue that you should make exceptions, and if you make exceptions, then you won't achieve the vision. Next slide, please, Nick. So just some real high-level results of what we've achieved since we've gone down this path. And, again, this took probably about 7 years to put in place, but we've seen a 50% reduction in IT incidents over these 7 years, and that's while the firm grew 25% in size in regards to people. This was something that we thought we could do over time, but not at this level. The success rate here is actually been happily very surprising. So these are all known incidents within the firm in relation to first, second, and third level IT support. And you can see that over time, each year we see this continue on a downward trajectory, and we actually expect that to go down even more since we've simplified the physical office space. So we've been real happy with this. We've also seen our satisfaction rankings improve significantly over time. So when we first started an anonymous IT survey firm-wide, we were scoring, in the low 3s out of 5, and it's gone up every year. So not only have we increased that ranking from 3.02 to 4.35, but just anecdotes of talking to people. I've had many folks come up to me and say, for the folks that have been at the firm throughout this transitionary period, how much things have improved. We've also had people that have joined the firm sort of post these architectural changes comment on how well things actually work, and I've had people tell me they've never seen such reliable service around basic IT tools. So we know that both sort of statistically and then just from comments that people have made, that there's an appreciation for this stuff and how it works these days. And then sort of the biggest, takeaway for me from an improvement standpoint is how much time we can now spend on truly digging into ROI of solutions versus just keeping the trains running. The work, the care and feeding of the infrastructure and the application stack is virtually zero at this point. And that has allowed us to realign our resources and really work with the different business units at the firm. Final slide, Nick. So just sort of in summary for those of you that may either be on this journey or are considering it, my recommendations is to adopt a strategy to develop enterprise architecture for your organization, complete with guiding principles. Once you have those guiding principles worked out, whatever they may be, you've got to work with leadership to get buy-in on the journey. It's an awful lot of work. It takes time, money, and effort. And there's going to be lots of examples of folks that come to you looking for exceptions because they have a business argument. And their business arguments, a lot of times, will be valid. What they don't see is the forest from the trees. So if you make exceptions, you will fail to achieve the vision. I would suggest, if you have dozens or hundreds of applications, I would attack the core services first. They take the most time, they take the most energy, but you'll get the biggest bang for the buck in the end. Your reward is getting resource time back to invest elsewhere in more valuable pursuits versus just the care and feeding of infrastructure. And then, my last sort of suggestion is when you get going on this road, don't stop until it's all done. It's very tempting after you do, some major transitions and you've been at this for a number of years and you've got a few applications left that don't quite fit into the vision, to say, okay, good enough. We can take our foot off the gas. I would say go to the very end. Close is not good enough. Legacy architectures cause problems, even if they're small applications that are insignificant to the business. They'll cause a lot of cost and a lot of time from your staff. So finish the job once you get started. It's definitely worth seeing this thing through to the end. So that's my take on enterprise architecture and the opportunities that folks have in this space. I think we're close to Q&A time, so I think I'll turn it over to anybody that might have some questions.
Great. There's some questions in the backstage chat, John. If you can see that.
Okay, yeah, they just came in. All right. So question 1, what steps do you do to handle cybersecurity? Does the cloud make you more vulnerable? That's a great question, because this was something that I used to get asked all the time when we first started down this path. And what I would say is you do need to be diligent about who you choose for your providers. If you work with small companies or startups, they tend to have less resources to dedicate to security. So I'm a big sort of fan of platform plays in regards to partnerships for applications. You can't always do that, but when you can, it's best. But I think the bottom line is, if you can get your organization aligned with a SaaS cloud architecture, you'll actually have infinitely better security. Organizations that have hundreds or thousands of clients tend to have a pretty buttoned up, ISO 27000, SOC 2 certification process. They generally can't get business unless they do that. They have teams and partnerships with cybersecurity professionals. They run through audits and vulnerability scans and all that stuff on a very regular basis. And it's, my experience that individual IT shops just can't keep up with that level. So I think you end up in a much better place. Question 2, what are some key differences between modernized enterprise architecture and traditional approaches in terms of enabling business agility? I think this is a challenge no matter what your architecture is, but I will say that if you're in a SaaS architecture, you can generally change out technologies a little easier. Now, that's going to be dependent on what kind of data and API integrations you've built. But typically, moving from an aged application that hasn't been upgraded in years on a SAN or a network that also is, pretty aged, and going to a new modern application on-prem, it's a pretty challenging task. Whereas going from one provider that's SaaS enabled to another tends to be a little bit less of a lift. But don't be fooled. It's still definitely some work. I think folks find that business agility in the cloud world is a lot more realistic. I think it's something people talk about on premise, but usually isn't achieved. Question 3 is, why are you so high on SaaS? I think it's, the organizations that develop application code and having a single code base allows for a much more rapid evolution of that technology. In a way, it forces organizations to keep up with either new feature sets, new integrations. It keeps the environment a lot more secure. I think it allows you to standardize on an access mechanism that is plain vanilla to users as they go from app to app, which takes some of the friction out of them learning how to use different applications. We all are aware that for all the money that's invested in software these days, the percentage of use case of feature sets in them is extremely low. It's not uncommon to spend 7 figures on software and have 10% of the function being actually utilized. So if you can make things easier for people, I think they'll tend to use tools a lot more extensively. Looks like we got about 3 minutes left, so probably time for one more question. Question 4, how can we balance the need for innovation and flexibility with the stability and reliability that enterprise architectures traditionally provides? That's kind of a long, wordy question. I guess what I would say is that, if you're in an old school architecture, I don't think you can embrace innovation all that easily. There may be even barriers that you can't do it. Your core applications in your application stack for your business is going to derive the majority of what people spend their time on and how they're getting their jobs done. And if those things are aged or inflexible, you're not gonna be able to embrace innovation all that much, in my experience. See if we have anything else come in. Looks like we've got 2 minutes left. So if anyone has any other questions, now's the time. I guess not. So I guess I'll kick it back to you.
Great. Thank you again, John, for an excellent keynote. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. As a reminder, please be sure to check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points for the chance to win one of several prizes. Our next session will begin at 11:35 a.m. Eastern Time, which will be a fireside chat titled Aligning People, Technology, and Business. Please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there.